Welcome back to Retro Collections with JR, the podcast where we dust off the reels, discs, and cartridges that shaped our sense of wonder. I'm your host, JR Porter, your friendly curator of nostalgia and forgotten shelves. Last time we unearthed Raiders of the Lost Ark, a story about belief, curiosity, and the balance between faith and reason. We watched a man of science discover that sometimes survival requires more than logic. It requires humility. And today, we're carrying the same sense of discovery upward, into the clouds, where another world of adventure awaits. Because, while Raiders dug deep into the earth to uncover the past, Hayao Miyazaki's Castle in the Sky takes us in the opposite direction, skyward, toward the future, and into the moral and emotional questions of what humanity does after it's found its treasures. This is Episode 3, Castle in the Sky, a story of flight, friendship, and the heavy weight of discovery. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Come along on a ride you'll never forget with an all-new feature-length movie adventure.
Go!
Coming to video for the very first time.
Hold on!
Kiki's Delivery Service. It's a journey of friendship and courage. With Kiki, a witch in training who's just getting the hang of flying.
Hold on there, son!
It's the story of Kiki's quest for independence and all her extraordinary adventures. Featuring Kirsten Dunst as Kiki and Matthew Lawrence as Tombo. Kiki's Delivery Service, coming this summer only on video.
When Castle in the Sky premiered in 1986, it marked the beginning of something special, not just for Japanese animation, but for how the world would come to see animation as a serious, emotional, and visionary art form. This was the very first film produced by Studio Ghibli, founded by Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata that same year, and it came at a crossroads in Japan's creative history, a moment when traditional hand-drawn animation was starting to compete with digital experimentation, and when the idea of what a children's film could be was about to change forever. Miyazaki, who had already directed Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind 2 years prior, poured everything he had learned from that project into Castle in the Sky. If Nausicaa was his environmental fable, a call to protect a dying Earth, Castle in the Sky was his adventure epic, a sweeping fusion of myth and moral reflection. The story of Laputa, the mythical floating city, actually reaches back much further, all the way to Jonathan Swift's 1926 novel, Gulliver's Travels. In Swift's satire, Laputa was a flying island inhabited by scientists and mathematicians so lost in theory that they'd forgotten how to live in reality. Miyazaki took that concept and reimagined it for a new era, transforming Swift's cold parody into something filled with heart and wonder. For Miyazaki, Laputa wasn't just a setting. It was a symbol, a dream of what human imagination could achieve, and a warning of what could happen when that imagination outpaces compassion. He was deeply inspired by European art and architecture, particularly the romantic imagery of Victorian science fiction. Think Jules Verne's and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or the intricate machines of the French illustrator Albert Robida. But there's also a directly Miyazaki touch, the floating airships inspired by his childhood fascination from flight, born from growing up in post-war Japan, surrounded by the remnants of military aviation. The airships in Castle in the Sky, from the pirate vessel Tiger Moth to the massive fortress-like dreadnoughts, weren't just designs on paper. Miyazaki personally storyboarded and sketched hundreds of mechanical concepts, insisting that even the most fantastical engines and wings had to make sense, visually and functionally. That realism in the midst of fantasy became one of Studio Ghibli's signatures. Production itself was remarkably ambitious. The animation team hand-drew over 70,000 cells with a level of color depth and lighting that, at the time, rivaled anything Disney was producing. Every scene, from the sprawling mining town of Patsu's home to the glowing vine-covered ruins of Laputa, was designed to feel alive, textured, and full of purpose. And then there's the score. Joe Hisaishi, collaborating with Miyazaki for only the second time, composed what many consider one of his most emotional soundtracks in all of animation. His music flows between the innocence of childhood, the rush of adventure, and the melancholy of lost civilizations, the Laputa theme in particular. Simple, haunting, and endlessly hopeful, has become an anthem for Ghibli itself. But Castle in the Sky wasn't just a technical or artistic achievement, it was also deeply personal. In interviews, Miyazaki said the story was inspired by his own longing for an unspoiled world, one untouched by greed or industrial dominance. He saw in the mining towns of his youth, the laborers, the smoke, the machinery, both the ingenuity and the cost of progress. That duality pulses through every frame of the film. The mining community where Patsu lives is grounded, human, and warm, but the sky where Laputa floats represents both humanity's highest dreams and its deepest hubris. When Castle in the Sky released in Japan, it performed modestly at the box office, but quickly became a cult classic, especially among young audiences who were captivated by its mix of spectacle and sincerity. Over time, it grew into one of the foundational works of modern anime, a film that established Studio Ghibli's identity and philosophy that technology, nature, and emotion aren't enemies, but elements in a delicate balance. Even today, its fingerprints are everywhere, from Pixar's Up to the steampunk aesthetics of Final Fantasy to the emotional rhythm of modern adventure cinema. In many ways, Castle in the Sky is both a beginning and a reflection, a dream built on centuries of imagination and decades of craft. It's the bridge between the industrial past and the boundless sky of human possibility. And like the floating city itself, it's a work of art that continues to drift just above us, unreachable yet forever inspiring us to look up. And with all that history in the clouds, from its literary roots to Miyazaki's personal vision, Castle in the Sky becomes more than just an animated adventure. It's a world built with purpose, every frame infused with the tension between wonder and consequence. So now, let's descend into that world ourselves. The mines below, the pirates above, and the hidden city waiting somewhere between heaven and earth. Castle in the Sky begins with an immediate sense of danger and mystery. A young girl named Sheeta, voiced by Anna Paquin in the 2003 English dub, is aboard a massive airship held captive by government agents under command of Colonel Musca, voiced by Mark Hamill, who excludes a cold, aristocratic menace reminiscent of his later work as the Joker. The tone feels familiar to anyone who's followed our series so far. There's that same moral tension we saw in Raiders of the Lost Ark and RoboCop, science, power, and belief colliding in a moment of chaos. When air pirates, led by the tough yet oddly motherly Dola, voiced by Clarice Lichtman, attack the airship in search of Sheeta's mysterious crystal pendant, Sheeta falls from the sky. But instead of plummeting to her death, the pendant glows with a faint blue light and slows her descent, carrying her gently into the arms of a young miner named Patsu, voiced by James Van Der Beek. From this moment, Miyazaki draws us into a grounded world of steam engines, mining towns, and soot, a stark contrast to the glowing crystal's ethereal light. Patsu dreams of proving the existence of the mythical floating island of Laputa, a name drawn directly from Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels as we discussed, where Laputa represented the folly of detached intellectualism. But in Miyazaki's vision, Laputa becomes something else entirely, both a relic of humanity's greatest innovation and a warning about what happens when we forget our connection to the earth. As Patsu shelters Sheeta and learns about her pendant, they are pursued relentlessly, first by Dola and her crew, and then by the military led by General Muoto, voiced by Jim Cummings, who wants Laputa's secrets for their own gain. The chase leads through vibrant steampunk towns, vast fields, and sky battles that capture both the thrill of flight and the dread of being hunted. Eventually, Sheeta is captured and brought back to Musca, who reveals that he knows her true identity. She is the last descendant of Laputa's royal line. Musca himself, it turns out, is also of Laputan blood, a revelation that reframes his obsession, not his greed alone, but as a warped sense of his destiny. His desire for power mirrors the kind of human arrogance we saw in Raiders, men trying to control the divine. It even echoes RoboCop, where technological advancement divorced from morality leads to corruption and decay. Musca's cruelty is chilling. He treats Laputa not as a legacy to be understood, but as a weapon to command. His characterization, refined, manipulative, and megalomaniacal, embodies the arrogance of modernity, untethered from empathy. In contrast, Sheeta and Patsu's bond remains sincere and deeply human, grounded in care and shared hope. When they finally reach Laputa, it's both breathtaking and haunting. The city is overgrown with vines and roots, inhabited only by a single robot sentinel, a creature both terrifying and yet gentle, tending to the wildlife that has reclaimed the floating fortress. In one of the film's most emotional sequences, the robot presents a flower to Sheeta, a silent gesture that speaks more about peace and remembrance than any dialogue could. Musca soon arrives with his army and seizes control of Laputa's central core, the heart of the island powered by the same crystal that saved Sheeta. He activates ancient weaponry, destroying ships and soldiers alike, declaring himself ruler of the world. The moment feels almost biblical, echoing Raiders' imagery of man wielding godlike forces he cannot truly comprehend. In a climactic act of defiance, Chita and Pazu recite the Laputan incantation, Balsa, triggering the destruction of Laputa's weapon systems. The castle begins to crumble, the roots tearing through its stone halls as the city separates, the weapon sinking into the earth, while the gardens and peaceful remnants ascend into the clouds once more. Muska, blinded by his lust for power, perishes in the collapse. In the aftermath, Pazu and Chita escape on Dola's ship, watching as Laputa drifts away into the sky, untouchable, unclaimed, free. The music swells, and like Raiders and RoboCop, we're left reflecting on humanity's fragile balance between wonder and destruction. The eternal question of whether we can create without conquering. The beauty of Castle in the Sky is that its story feels timeless, and yet its ideas feel universal. Beneath the sky battles and glowing crystals lies a conversation about what it means to be human, how we build, how we remember, and what we choose to protect. Like RoboCop and Raiders of the Lost Ark, it asks whether our creations define us, or whether it's our compassion that does. Let's explore these ideas through a few of the film's key themes, beginning where Miyazaki always starts, the delicate balance between technology and nature. Where RoboCop showed us technology's potential to strip away humanity, Castle in the Sky reminds us that it can also coexist with nature, if used with respect. Miyazaki's films often explore humanity's uneasy relationship with nature, and Castle in the Sky might be his purest statement. Technology here is neither savior nor villain, it's a mirror. The Laputan robots capture this duality. In one scene, a reawakened robot devastates a fortress, raining fire from the sky, pure destruction. Later, another robot gently cares for birds, laying flowers on a grave of its fallen kin. The same design, two purposes, one of war, one of life. Laputa's robots aren't villains or weapons by default. They're caretakers. They water plants and guard wildlife, gentle reflections of humanity's better instincts. When Muska reawakens Laputa's arsenal, laser beams cutting through clouds, we see the same truth from RoboCop and Raiders. Progress without conscience can lead to ruin here. Miyazaki's genius is in showing both sides, that invention is only as moral as the hands that guide it. As Miyazaki also shows us that technology reflects the intent of its user, it magnifies our compassion as easily as our greed. Laputa itself is the ultimate metaphor, half mechanical, half organic. Its roots literally anchoring its machinery to the soil below. Even floating miles above the earth, it cannot escape nature's pull. When Chita and Pazu choose to destroy Laputa rather than let it become a weapon, they affirm a core belief that humanity's creations must serve life, not dominate it. It's a poetic warning wrapped in beauty, that progress without empathy always collapses under its own weight. And where RoboCop was rooted in grit and tragedy, Castle in the Sky offers a gentler possibility, that humanity can coexist with what it creates, if it remembers its roots. But innocence, too, has a role in that remembrance. For even when the machines fall silent, it's often the pure-hearted who remind us what we've lost. Pazu and Chita are children navigating an adult world built on greed, politics, and power. Their innocence isn't naivete, it's conviction. They act from care, not calculation. In a world that sees everything as a means to control, their empathy becomes radical. Colonel Muska, voiced with chilling composure from Mark Hamill, is the mere opposite. Intelligent, disciplined, but hollow. He sees the world as a hierarchy. The strong above, the weak below. He believes that knowledge justifies cruelty, that control equals destiny. His obsession with Laputa mirrors OCP's corporate coldness in RoboCop, and Belloc's greed in Raiders. Men who mistake possession for purpose. Through Chita and Pazu, Miyazaki suggests that innocence is not the absence of knowledge, it's the presence of moral clarity. They see wonder where others see weaponry. Their faith in goodness, much like Indy's faith in history or Murphy's rediscovery of his humanity, becomes a counterweight to cynicism. And yet, innocence alone isn't enough. To move forward, we must also reckon with the past, the legacies we inherit, and the memories we carry. Laputa is more than a mythical city. It's a haunting memory of civilization's peak and collapse. It floats above the earth like an open question. What happens when progress outruns purpose? Chita and Muska share the same bloodline, but embody two opposite understandings of legacy. Chita treats her ancestry as a warning, a story to be understood and respected. Muska treats it as ownership, proof that he deserves dominion over others. In him, the past becomes a justification for tyranny. In her, it becomes a call to humility. We saw echoes of this before when Indy struggled between preserving artifacts for history versus hoarding them for fame, or when RoboCop grappled with the fragments of his lost identity. In all three stories, legacy becomes the battlefield between memory and control. When Chita and Pazu speak the word balse, they're not destroying Laputa, they're releasing it. This act transforms destruction into remembrance, showing that the truest way to honor the past is to let it go. Miyazaki suggests that remembrance should guide us, not bind us. But even as the ruins fall away, something remains constant. The human desire to rise, to explore, to touch the horizon. That's where Miyazaki leaves us, gazing upward. Few filmmakers romanticize the sky quite like Hayao Miyazaki. For him, flight isn't just physical, it's philosophical. The sky represents freedom, imagination, and the enduring drive to transcend. Yet it also symbolizes danger. The temptation to rise is so high that we forget what grounds us. Every major character in Castle in the Sky projects something different onto the sky. For Patsu, it's the dream of discovery, proof that hope can endure even underground. For Shita, it's the promise of redemption, a place where she might escape her heritage and define herself anew. For Dola and her crew, it's rebellion, the only realm where they can live freely. And for Muska, it's a throne, the ultimate vantage point from which to look down upon others. In this way, the film mirrors both Raiders and RoboCop. Each story traces the human need to ascend, to become something more than what we are. But while Indy and Murphy's journeys wrestled with faith and identity, Miyazaki turns the question outward, asking what kind of world we build when we finally reach the heights we've dreamed of. The tragedy of Laputa's fall is that its creators forgot their connection to the earth. They sought purity in isolation, perfection in the clouds, and in doing so, they lost themselves. Yet, even in its ruin, Miyazaki finds beauty. The floating gardens, the single robot tending the flowers, these are testaments to resilience, to life enduring even after ambition collapses. As Laputa drifts into the clouds at the film's end, we're left with a feeling both wistful and hopeful. Humanity will always look to the sky, to create, to dream, to rise. But the real strength lies not in how high we soar, but in how gently we return. And with that, we've reached the end of this little journey through time. From the steel and circuitry of RoboCop, to the sacred sands of Raiders of the Lost Ark, to the floating gardens of Castle in the Sky. 3 films, 3 worlds. Each asking the same timeless question in their own language. What does it mean to be human in a world constantly reshaped by what we create, discover, and believe? RoboCop showed us a man fighting to reclaim his soul from the cold grasp of technology. Raiders revealed a world where faith and knowledge collide, reminding us that reverence sometimes matters more than reason. And Castle in the Sky lifted us into the clouds to show us that progress without heart can destroy the very beauty it seeks to preserve. Each story, in its own way, finds balance between machine and man, belief and logic, nature and invention. Together they form a portrait of the 1980s not just as a decade of spectacle, but as a reflection of our fears and hopes. A time when humanity stood at the threshold of both wonder and self-destruction. What I love most about revisiting these films is how even decades later they still speak to us. They remind us that nostalgia isn't just about looking backward, it's about remembering what's worth carrying forward. So whether you're holding a VHS tape, a vinyl record, or just a memory of your favorite movie night, these stories endure because they remind us of who we are when the lights go down. Thank you for joining me on this trip through retro collections. Maybe this is where we land for now, or maybe there's another reel waiting somewhere down the line. Until then, keep collecting, keep wondering, and never stop rewinding. I'm J.R. Porter, and this has been Retro Collections, where every story, no matter how old, still finds a way to shine. See you next time.
Keep flashing off and on.